Dear Catalina, I'm writing you a letter from the border.
God, please hear me. I pray for my family that is
Hola,
still on the
Mia.
other side.
I miss you. I'm writing you a letter from
Dear
the border.
officers, this letter from the border is
Dear
an attempt
sir,
to find
I am
my
the wife
uncle.
of a deported veteran. My husband served this country for
To
7
anyone
years
that
in the
reads
United
this
States
letter from the
Armed
wall,
Forces.
I just want to wish you good luck, and may God bless you.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the lives of John and Jane Doe. What can I say about John and Jane? They were two hardworking people who loved their families. They loved their families so much that they always put the needs of their families in front of their own, which is how it should be. Yes, I wish there were a lot more people like John and Jane. John and Jane didn't have much, but they always did the best they could with the hand that life dealt them. I told you they were hardworking. Two of the hardest working people I have ever met. You would think that two people who worked as hard as they did would have a lot of really nice things. Well, they didn't. They didn't have much at all. You would think that two people who worked as much and as hard as they did would have a really nice big house. Well, John and Jane didn't. In fact, the house that they lived in didn't even have indoor plumbing or electricity. But that didn't stop them from doing what needed to be done. They still got up every morning, put on the best clothes that they had, and went out into the world looking for work to support their families. You would never see them on some street corner asking for handouts of food, water, or money. But I do see a lot of that on our streets. I do. I see a lot of people with signs or with their hands out saying, "Give me." I guess that's one of the differences between them and us, because you see, John and Jane worked at anything they could. They took any job they were ever offered. They even worked the jobs that no one else wanted to do, the jobs that didn't pay much. And you know what? With as little as they had and with as little as they made, they still found a way to spend only what was necessary on themselves so that they had enough to support their families at home. I wish there were a lot more people like John and Jane, which is why we're here today, to celebrate their lives, to pay them their final respects, because they deserve it, just like any one of us do. Now, I would like to give this opportunity to some of John and Jane's friends who would like to share a little bit more about them.
I'd like to share a few words about John. Just a few days before he passed away, John had set out to do the hardest, most selfless thing anyone can do. It was so hot that day. It must have gotten up to 120 degrees, even though it had been freezing the night before. But that's just life in the desert. He didn't have a blanket. He just slept under the stars with the clothes he had on. He might have gotten sick from being out in the cold. He wasn't feeling his best the next day. Now don't get me wrong, John tried to take care of himself. He carried a razor, a small tube of toothpaste, a toothbrush, along with una Santa Biblia, a Bible. He was also carrying a faded picture of someone. You couldn't quite make out who it was, but it must have been someone very important to him. He knew he had to try and stay hydrated as best he could, but he quickly ran out of water. He did manage to find a gallon container that might have helped him, but someone had sliced holes in the container with a knife. Who would do such a thing? What has humanity come to that we just cut holes in a container? Why is that necessary? John died later that day, not far from there. When he was found, it was impossible to recognize him. The tip of his nose had come off. His face has been mummified. Parts of his body were missing. Some of the local wildlife no doubt found him before anyone else did.
Dear Jane, she was a mother, a daughter, and a sister. She was young, but she was brave, and boy, was she strong. And she was smart too. She carried a list of things not to forget with her the day she passed away. That list had water, salt, lemons, garlic, matches, canned and packaged food. But she also carried this picture of a very young child, maybe around 2 years old. They seemed to be at her birthday party. And then she had this letter from a sweetheart that was tucked away in a small coin purse in her pocket. Then her body was found 7 days after she slipped in the canal trying to cross it. Nobody at the county medical examiner's office could identify John or Jane, and they didn't know who to contact because nobody knew who John Doe or Jane Doe were. So their belongings remained there, kept in a locker at the county medical examiner's office.
John and Jane. John and Jane. John Doe and Jane Doe. John and Jane are laid to rest in the Terrace Park Cemetery in Holtville, California, just 15 miles north of the border in Imperial County. They're buried there in shallow graves along with 800 other people whose names also happen to be John Doe and Jane Doe. Some died in the desert, like John. Some drowned in a canal, like Jane. Others were found along the highway, attacked by snakes or wild animals or hit by a car. Some may even have been murdered. But nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows because nobody knows his or her story. Even the people back home don't know what happened to them. If there were people waiting on the other side of the border, they don't know their story. All anyone knows is that one day, John and Jane left in search of opportunity and were never heard from again.
There have been about 10,000 John and Jane Doe since 1994, when Operation Gatekeeper went into effect. Before that, there were 1 or 2 John and Janes a month. Since then, there are 1 or 2 a day. Hundreds of steel walls and barriers were built along the U.S.-Mexican border from Texas right into the Pacific Ocean and ends in San Ysidro, California at Friendship Park. 10,000 human beings gone. That's more than double the amount of people who died at 9/11 and Pearl Harbor combined. That wall cost $2.4 billion to build and approximately $15.5 billion a year to maintain border security. But it cost John and Jane a lot more than that. The number of those crossing has decreased very little, but the amount of deaths have increased dramatically. 10,000 human beings gone, 10,000 families affected, 10,000 dreams cut short. Not even the threat of death keeps them from crossing. It is the dream of hope that keeps them coming.
So today we celebrate the lives of John and Jane Doe, who had a little and gave it all. To pay your respects to the nearly 800 Johns and Jane Does buried in a pauper's grave behind Terrace Park Cemetery, Visiting hours are between 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. daily, with special permission from the groundskeeper. However, the rest of Terrace Park is open from 7 a.m. till sunset daily. Their graves are not too hard to find. Just walk along the main path through the cemetery, past the green grass, the beautiful shade trees and headstones, until you get to the end of the road. If the groundskeeper has unlocked the gate, then you'll find them there, on the other side of the wall. Again. You see, we try keeping them separated from us by a wall in life. And then we do it to them again in their death. Unlike the rest of Terrace Park Cemetery, the area where they're buried is a barren dirt field. No trees, no grass. Their headstones are merely bricks with their names John Doe and Jane Doe. And be careful not to walk on the graves. They're so shallow they might cave in. Many pay their respects by bringing flowers or simple decorated crosses made of wood that have the words "No olvidados" on them. Not forgotten. John, Jane, I truly hope we do not ever forget you. We may not have known who you were or what your stories are, but the risks you've all taken, the sacrifices you've all made in pursuing your human rights of a good, productive, and dignified life are not only brave, but should be admired and learned from by others. Rest in peace, John and Jane Doe. John and Jane Doe.
Presente. You're in a better place now.
Que te vaya bien.
Vaya con Dios.
Not forgotten.
No olvidados.